Hello, this is Mark Tooley, editor of Providence, a journal of Christianity and American foreign policy. Today I have the pleasure of conversing with Samah Norquist, who is the Chief Advisor for International Religious Freedom at USAID, United States Agency for International Development. So, Mrs. Norquist, thank you so much for joining this conversation.
I'm delighted to be with you. Thanks, Mark, for having me.
And if you don't mind my asking, share a little bit about your own background, professional background.
Sure. So as you mentioned, I currently just appointed to be the chief advisor for our administrator on international religious freedom. This position came slowly after, shortly, after the executive order that the president signed on advancing religious freedom. So my new position was started in early July. Prior to that, I joined USAID back in October 2017, working in the Middle East Bureau, advancing religious freedom and handling the religious freedom portfolio for the Middle East. Particularly started with our response in northern Iraq to the genocide that was committed against the Christians and Yazidis and other religious groups in northern Iraq by ISIS.
And did you also serve with USAID during the Bush administration?
I did. I served during that time. I was not political appointee, but everybody treated me like one. I was actually, I served there as a senior advisor. During that time, public diplomacy towards the Muslim world was a big thing after 9/11 and after the war in Iraq and Afghanistan. So a lot of the work that we did in terms of foreign assistance was predominantly in Muslim society and Muslim countries. So we worked on a lot of issues such as branding, which in many parts of the world, people didn't even know what USAID was. When we did some of those studies, people thought USAID was just either part of the UN or just a big NGO. And at that time, Administrator Andrew Natsios took the branding issue very seriously. And we revamped how we do business and make sure that everywhere we go and wherever there's a US assistance, that the American flag and USAID logo is on it, so people know where that assistance coming from the American people.
And for USAID to take a specific interest in international religious freedom is a relatively new development, isn't it?
It's yes and no. The USAID has done a lot of work. It wasn't specifically on advancing religious freedom, but worked with faith-based organizations on a number of issues or programs that we do around the world. But what's new with this is, first of all, as you know, religious freedom is our first freedom, right? This is not just a Republican or a Trump, idea. This is an American value. This is part of our DNA, and it's part of our story and the good things and leadership that we do around the world. What's different with this is that the administration came and elevated this issue as part of our national security and as part of the Trump administration's foreign policy priorities. The issue of advancing religious freedom was also part of the national security strategy of 2017 that the Trump administration put together. So what this issue did is that it became elevated to that position. And as USAID being part of the 3Ds, defense, diplomacy, and development, we took the sort of the flag of pushing through. That started with our response in Iraq, as I mentioned. And a lot of things happened and changed. One, putting that issue as not just an issue on its own and a value that we need to promote, but also doing it across all sectors, whether education, whether health, economic development, governance and democracy, all across the world. How do you make sure that marginalized communities are no longer marginalized, that they are not being discriminated against any of our assistance and have equal access to that assistance? USAID does a lot of economic development, as you do, and humanitarian assistance. And with the executive order, as we are working through it and institutionalize the work that we're doing, is how do we ensure that in both tracks, the development part and the humanitarian assistance part, that we have religious freedom and access to religious and ethnic groups that are marginalized and denied access are part of what we provide and how we respond to. And religious freedom violations take a different shape or forms, as you know. Some are persecuted, some are discriminated against, some are denied access to jobs or services. And our job and our hope as we are developing the programs to push the economic development of a country, that those communities continue to be part of what we do and their governments are responsive to their needs.
You mentioned Christians and Yazidis in Iraq who have suffered terribly, among other religious minorities. What has USAID been doing? What is it doing currently? What has it been doing recently to help those persecuted communities?
So, there are different kinds of methods that USAID carries its work around the world. One of the things, working with big implementing partners, such as the UN or big international organizations. When the Trump administration came, the mandate was step away from that, right? Because what we found on the ground, that these communities, one, didn't know that the United States is the biggest donor to the UNDP that does all that work in Iraq, right? Not just in northern Iraq, but all across. And you know how much money we spend, probably billions and billions of money that we spend in Iraq. So what we spend in northern Iraq as a direct response since 2018 is really small compared to what we spend across the country. The United States government spent more than $400 million, a little bit more than $400 million, doing a lot of things. The most important part of that part of assistance to northern Iraq, to Christians, Yazidis, and others in that area is not working with those big implementers, is actually partnering with faith-based organizations, with local groups, listening and engaging with people on the ground that can identify the needs that the United States government needs to help them with, and those local leaders and faith-based leaders that have the trust of their own communities and can tell us directly what they need, and we can directly respond and work with them without the middleman or without the big man, right? There's a room for the big man, there's room for the little men, right? Some of the obstacles that we had was, how do you give U.S. tax money to groups without accountability or without capacity building, just to ensure that nothing is going to waste? And that's part of one of the things that we worked on. So our former administrator, Mar Green, last May, launched the new partnership initiative. And that and the first award that we gave out of that initiative was actually in Iraq. It was $4 million, but we partnered with 6 local groups, Chaldean, Kurds, evangelical, that never received money from USAID, or if they have, it was in the last 16 years. So those groups have done remarkable work in Erbil and in northern Iraq on business training, women training, school and computer and English projects, solar energy, and it's wonderful to see that you're working directly with the people, holding hands, building their capacity, and they have so much potential. And guess what? They are the most advocate for United States assistance. It's everywhere. Without USAID or without the assistance of the US government, we would never reach that. So that partner initiative is not just for religious freedom, but it's across all sectors that we do at USAID. The first one we launched was in Iraq. And there is one, our second one is right now live regionally regionally across the Middle East, and in response to the executive order.
It's very hard to measure, no doubt, but is there any evidence that U.S. policy has helped to slow or stop the Christian exodus from Iraq, or to encourage Christians to return to Iraq?
You know, the USAID is, I call them the little guys on the spectrum of the US government power, right? On this issue, I would argue that we were actually to really exceed and deliver and respond to those communities. However, USAID and assistance is not the only answer to create a safe place for those communities. It's their own government's accountability to provide assistance, security, you know, jobs, all the things that make a community want to go back. I think a number of people went back, and we just recently heard that around a number of Yazidis went back to Sinjar. Now, I can brag about how wonderful USAID made it possible for people, and I wish that was the case. Some of it is the case because we were able to partner with the Hungarian government, for example, working with the Nadia Murad's initiative in some of the projects that we do. But it was also part of the COVID. People were escaping, the Yazidis were escaping some of the IDPs fearing COVID and wanting to be with their loved ones in their home. But a number of people went back. Security is a little bit better, but I come from the school, and I believe that without those communities, there's nothing called the Middle East. The Middle East, without its religious and ethnic groups that makes that region so rich with its history and culture and music and contributions, if you lose those communities, you lose the importance of the Middle East. So to me, it's a very not just a political imperative or a priority. To me, it's a personal endeavor as well.
And are there other Christian communities throughout the Mideast to whom USAID is relating directly, as you are in Iraq?
So we are starting to explore those opportunities that we are now. You know the Middle East like I do. Every country has its own opportunities and it has own challenges, and every government plays footsie with us, depends on who's in that seat. We were able to work with a small, make some programs in Jordan, in Lebanon. We did partner with a Orthodox organization in Syria, actually. It's a faith-based organization to do some humanitarian training and building capacity and humanitarian assistance. The president announced some funding for the Northeast Syria to help the Christian communities and other communities that were targeted by ISIS in the northeast of Syria. And USAID is now working on identifying some of those groups to deliver and make sure that those villages that were attacked, that they have all the services that they need, and or work with the communities on their needs. Also in Morocco, we're working on some of the cultural heritage preservation. Morocco has one of the largest Jewish communities outside Israel in the Middle East, and they're part of the government, they're part of the society. There are a lot of heritage sites that were cemeteries, synagogues, and cultural centers that needs a lot of preservation. So we're looking at some of those opportunities, and we identify in order to contribute to those renovation and preservation. And by the way, Mark, this is not something new or nuclear, secrets that we discovered. USAID has done that work before. It's just I tell my team we're really bad about telling USAID's story. We're very focused on getting the work done, and we forget to take the credit and make the story on why USAID matters. Not all the times, but most of the times when we do it right, and all the incredible work that the American people should be taking credit for, and we should be very proud of.
And shifting away from the Mideast, obviously Christians in northern Nigeria have been suffering terribly from Islamist-related attacks. Is USAID relating to them at all?
So USAID works in Nigeria, and Nigeria, as you stated, is one of the hotspots that we're looking at. We've spent around 300, somewhere around 300 million in the Northeast, working on with different communities. This, as we are identifying the hotspots and the needs on the people, we're applying the model that we applied in Iraq in order to engage with the local groups, identify faith-based organizations that we can work with, use our convening power in order to bring all these communities together and understand what are the needs. What can USAID deliver these communities? And can USAID make the difference? In my opinion, yes, we can. Through our assistance, we can make the difference. We can't solve all the problems in the world, but this is one of the Northeast Nigeria is one of the top priority of our acting administrator, John Barsa. That and the Uyghurs, and he's one of the biggest support. I'm very lucky to have both bosses, the previous one and the current one, incredibly strong advocates and supporters of my work, and the incredible empowerment that they give me in order to be able to do what I can do, along with my team, because I have a wonderful team from foreign service officers to civil servants to politicals to contractors. And it's wonderful to see how this issue really exceeds the borders of politicals and political boundaries, if you may, because the more you see the difference that we can make, or see the atrocities, or see the suffering of people around the world, and even if we can move the needle that much, it's worth it.
You mentioned the Uyghurs, the Muslim group, of course, being tormented by China's government. Is USAID relating to the Uyghurs currently, or making plans to in the future?
Well, we're looking at all possibilities. The president has been very outspoken about the atrocities that are happening in Xinjiang, and the vice president and the secretary and our administrator. So it's one of the issues that we're very concerned about. Obviously, there's nothing in that I can talk about right now, but it's one of the areas that we're looking out to see if there is a way that we can make sure that we use the power of the executive order that gives us the tools to respond to the needs, whether the ones, particularly when you have many Uyghur refugees around the world. Turkey has a big number of refugees, so it's in Central Asia. So United Arab Emirates has some. So they're scattered some, but it's an issue that really needs the United States leadership. And I really never heard of any administration brings that issue the way that this administration brought it up. And Congress, the U.S. Congress, in a bipartisan manner, have passed 3 important legislation: the H.R. 390, which is the Iraq-Syria ISIS Accountability Act. There was a Nicaragua Act that was passed, I believe, last year. And then just this past June, the president also signed the Uyghurs Act. So in a very bipartisan, very American fashion, advancing religious freedom continues to make headway. The only difference that this administration gave the empowerment for us to elevate it and affirm our commitment around the world. And we made a difference, because the world had noticed how important it is. The State Department held the Ministerial on Advancing Religious Freedom both in 2018 and 19. Couldn't do it this year because of COVID. But Ambassador Sam Brownback is very vocal about the importance of this issue. So is the Secretary Pompeo. Vice President is a hero on this. So it starts from the top, and there is no lack of commitment by this administration, and not to mention the president's address last September, a year from now, last year, addressing the the United Nations on advancing religious freedom and sending a strong message to the world on that.
Samah Norquist, Chief Advisor for International Religious Freedom at USAID. Thank you for a very edifying conversation.
Thank you, Mark. Thanks for having me.